G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. So, retro minis, classic editions, whatever you want to call them, I've never really had that much of an interest in them, to be honest. I'm probably the world's worst gamer. I have several vintage consoles, which are just behind the camera, and a bit of a collection of games, and several old computers. Problem is, I tend to work, sleep, eat, and if I've got a little bit of time up my sleeve, I'm making these videos. However, I had a birthday a couple of months ago. Yeah, and then this happened. I guess they're kind of small. They do sneak up on you. But Jason, you're recording this on the 3rd of December 2018. The PlayStation Classic just got released. Yes, I know the PlayStation just got released. So this all started by me picking up the NES Classic on a bit of a whim because, well, it's adorable, and they all are really. And then for my birthday, a mate of mine, Ian, g'day Ian, got me the C64 Mini because he knows I'm into retro computers and stuff like that. However, then I kind of felt that I had the NES Classic, so you kind of got to have the Super NES Classic with it as well, don't you? So I got that one. But even after those two, I was actually a Sega kid. I grew up on the Master System and the Mega Drive. So I then got the Flashback HD from EB Games the afternoon that on my birthday. Now, before you say anything, I know that the Flashback HD isn't a mini, so to speak, and we are getting one sometime next year. But for now, for us Sega fans, that's kind of the closest that we've got. And the PlayStation I just picked up this morning, mainly because this isn't going to be an exhaustive review of all of them. That's been done to death. There's plenty of videos out there that go through all the hardware, the software and everything. I thought it'd be good to do a video from almost like an outsider's point of view, because this isn't my normal thing. And not just to look, we'll look at them individually, but kind of as a whole and as a collection. So we'll start with the two Nintendos, because they kind of go together, and we'll go from there. So the actual consoles, I think, are just perfect. They're a brilliant representation of what the original console was, just a lot smaller. Got the original ridges along the top. Obviously the door doesn't do anything because we don't put cartridges in these. Power and reset where they should be, and the two ports for the gamepads exactly where they were originally. They're light, there's not much to them. All these consoles are just a small board, usually with an ARM processor and running emulation, so there's nothing actually to them. But I think as an actual console they work really well. And the Super Nintendo is just the same. Obviously no cartridge, and the eject button does anything, but the power switch, the reset button, and I love this little cover that goes over the USB ports. So when it's just nicely sitting there on your shelf, it just completely looks the part, and I think is brilliant. If we take a quick look at the gamepads, this is a Super Nintendo one, and it feels exactly the way a Super Nintendo gamepad should. It's the perfect size, the buttons have got just the right amount of clickiness, the D-pad works, and I think they've done brilliantly here. And same with the Nintendo one. The D-pad feels exactly right. I've got an original gamepad and it feels just perfect, just a newer, clickier, original, just like they would have felt like when they were new. So when you power on the Nintendo, this is the interface you get. And I actually think that Nintendo went absolutely brilliant on this. You get your nice big icons in the middle there, but still can see how many games you've got along the bottom. And I think it works absolutely brilliantly. The background music isn't too bad. And all in all, I think it works. So let's see what it's like to actually play a game, and we'll just simply go with good old Super Mario Brothers. Now I think the graphics look absolutely brilliant, they're crystal clear. I'm not seeing any weird artifacting or anything looking out of the ordinary. The graphics, everything is just nice and crisp, and there's no lag in the controller. The controller, by the way, feels absolutely perfect. There's no complaints about that whatsoever. And all in all, I think this console does exactly what it set out to do, and that's give a really easy, fun way to play these old games and just give you that nice big nostalgia hit, which is exactly what these things are meant for. And it plays exactly the way an original Nintendo would, except that it looks absolutely fantastic on a big LCD screen. Looking at the interface of the Super Nintendo, again, I think it just works. The layout's obviously incredibly similar to the Nintendo Classic, but it just works. I've already modded this one, so I've already added a few games to it. So if you have a look in here, I've added a couple of Final Fight games and NBA Jam. And we go back to the original games. And there's the range of games, I think, on either of these consoles, they just got bang on. We've got Street Fighter, we've got Castlevania, Ghouls and Ghosts, Mario Kart, Mario World, Metroid, Zelda. I just don't think you could ask for Donkey Kong. I just don't think you could ask for anything more. These really are the epitome of the games that the Nintendos were famous for. So let's have a quick look at Mario Kart, because honestly that's my personal favourite. And again, the graphics just look super sharp. Whatever they're using for emulation, I think is absolutely perfect. And watch me completely suck at this because I have not played it in years. But it's exactly the way I remember it. It feels absolutely perfect. It handles right. The controller feels exactly the way it should. And I really think Nintendo knocked it out of the park. Nintendo absolutely hit it for 6 on these particular consoles. And this is just an awesome way of playing, for instance, Super Mario Kart, just the way we used to, on a nice big LCD or plasma screen, without having to worry about rubbish looking upscaling or it just looking terrible on the screen. This is just a fantastic way to play these games.
Now the Mega Drive Flashback HD has copped a lot of flack. I think it looks the part, there's no doubt about it. I really don't like this At Games logo here. That's where the Mega Drive logo should be. If you want to put the At Games symbol on here, it should have been up here or just out of the way. But other than that, you've got your nice big 16-bit, the menu button instead of a reset button. Obviously the volume control's gone, and an on-off switch. I do like the fact that you can plug in original gamepads. I think that's kind of cool. And unlike the other ones, this will actually read original cartridges. All it really does is it copies the ROM to the emulator and then emulates. It doesn't play the cartridge directly. The only thing I don't like is that it doesn't then save the ROM. When it rips the ROM from the cartridge, it only does it until you power it off and then it disappears, which I think is a bit crap. The gamepad is okay. I don't think it's the best thing in the world, but it does the job. It doesn't feel that much different to an original one, and yeah, I think it does okay, and it's wireless, so you can sit right back on the couch and play without any hassles whatsoever.
The menu system for the Mega Drive, I think it looks good.
It doesn't have At Games branding everywhere. It's got the nice Mega Drive logo up in the top left-hand corner. But the menu navigation is absolutely ridiculous. We use B and C to flip through the menus at the side, and then the D-pad to change. Oh, by the way, I've already modded this one as well and added some games. A lot of these games aren't on here. Quick point to make: this is a modern Sega Mega Drive, and they didn't include Streets of Rage. Seriously, who was sitting in that meeting and went, Streets of Rage? Oh, we don't really need that. But speaking of Streets of Rage, let's have a quick look. See, I hit the wrong button. Now, the reviews of this console have not been good, let's be honest. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is made by At Games. And At Games haven't done well with the Sega brand in the past. In fact, I would actually go as far as to say that At Games have quite sullied the legacy of the Mega Drive, which is a big disappointment. But I don't think that this particular console deserves all the negative publicity that it's been given. I've played this a bunch of times, and I love my Sega stuff, and I specifically love Streets of Rage. And I actually think this is a really good way of playing it. Again, the graphics are crystal clear. It's upscaled beautifully. People have picked the emulation to pieces, saying that the audio isn't great. And like, I'm not really big. Like, haven't studied the games in the past, and I haven't really bothered sitting there comparing my original Mega Drive to this one, because this is it's perfectly playable. I don't think the sound is bad. The control pads feel a little cheap, but they're certainly usable. I wouldn't say that makes the game unplayable by any stretch of the imagination. And I really am looking forward to the official Sega Classic when it comes out next year. But as an interim, I've got no problem with this console whatsoever, and I think it plays really well. And I can play my Streets of Rage, and I can play a bit of Sonic, and I can even play some Master System games. So if I want to, I can spark up some Alex Kidd and Miracle World, and have some fun with that. And I think it works, and I don't think it deserves even half the flack that it's copped since it was released.
Of all these retro consoles, it's actually the C64 that I've struggled with the most, mainly because of the non-functioning fake keyboard. Back in the day, the main difference between a computer and a console was the keyboard, and this doesn't work. Maybe one day someone smarter than me will come up with a little PCB or something that goes in underneath with all the little micro switches and actually make this functional. But it does certainly look the part. I like the fact that they used kind of the pre-yellowed brown, because that's not what the colour of the original console was. This is what they look like now when they've yellowed. And the joystick, although again has copped a lot of grief, I think it does the job. Obviously it's not micro switched, but I've certainly used worse joysticks, the people that have complained, I think it's because it looks like a Competition Pro, it should therefore be micro switched, and it's not, which is a disappointment. But it's functional, and for the most part it works. So the menu system for the C64 Mini I think really suits the part. You've got all your nice game selections, some nice big screenshots up the top so you know what you're looking at, and a good little blurb to tell you about the game if you're not that familiar. We're going to have a quick game of Pit Stop 2. because that's the one I'm the most familiar with. You've got to remember I didn't actually grow up with the C64, but this is a nice easy one for me to demo and show you what games look like. So let's jump into pit stop. Let's keep it all default, start the race, and see, look, I've already got to put my name in through the virtual keyboard. And there we go. So the graphics, a bit like the other 8-bit machines, are nice and crisp. There's no weird artifacting or anything like that. Obviously the graphics are very simple because the Commodore 64, I mean, for its day it was very impressive, but obviously by today's standards it looks incredibly simple. But I think it presents well. The speed is nice, there's no lag from the joystick that I can feel, although some people have complained, although this one does have the latest firmware which fixes it up to a decent degree. And it runs fine. I mean, I think the virtual keyboard is still a bit of a disappointment and I find it a bit painful. Mind you, you don't have to use it all that often, and once you get the hang of it, it's kind of becomes second nature.
And finally we have the PlayStation Classic. Now it looks absolutely perfect. The build quality is on par with the Nintendo's. Again, there's not much in these. You've got your 2 USB ports at the front where the controllers should and do plug in. You've got reset, power, and an open button, which I believe is used for switching discs on multi-disc games. However, HDMI micro USB at the back, and it does the job, and I think it looks absolutely brilliant. The gamepad, I don't know. Now, I realise this is the original gamepad that came with the PlayStation when it was first released, but you've got to remember that the DualShock came out, I think, within the first 12 months, or about the 12-month mark. So every game for the PlayStation after about the first 12 months supported the DualShock with the analog sticks. And I just really wish that Sony had just gone that little extra step and given us the DualShock controller with the analog sticks. But in saying that, this feels fine. The buttons are nice and clicky. It reminds me exactly the way of what a PlayStation controller should feel like and should look like. For me, I've got big hands, so they were always a little small. But it works, and the games that do come on here take full advantage of just simply this controller.
And now we get to the menu system of the PlayStation Classic, and it is disappointing. It is just, I mean, it's completely functional. You flip between your games and you select one and off you go, but there's just nothing very PlayStation-y about it. I mean, look, I realise that the normal interface that we're all used to didn't really come out until the PlayStation 2, but it's all part of the legacy of the PlayStation. I really think they could have done a bit more. But looking through the games, we've got some really great ones. Siphon Filter, Tekken 3, which is a personal favourite of mine. And then a bunch of really just unknown... I mean, I've heard of Cool Borders. Final Fantasy VII is obviously it's a killer app, I suppose you could call it, for the console. Grand Theft Auto. Metal Gear Solid's there. Abe's Odyssey is a bit of a hidden gem, but I'm glad to see it there. Rayman, it's not a bad game, but for me it always played second fiddle to Spyro and Crash Bandicoot and stuff like that, which neither of them are here. Ridge Racer Type 4, gave that a quick play earlier. It's okay, but it's certainly no Gran Turismo. And there we are, we're already back at the beginning. So let's spark up some Tekken 3, because I'm familiar with good old Tekken. Now let's see how the graphics from the old PlayStation, how well they look on a big LCD and how well they've aged. Of quickly jump into arcade mode. I'll go with Yoshimitsu because that's who I always go with. Let's have a look.
Round 1. Fight.
And it's... look, my opinion is I actually don't think the PlayStation graphics have aged that well. The thing is about the 16 and the 8-bit eras where the graphics were fairly simple. They upscaled reasonably well because they were nice and clean. You got to realise that the PlayStation's from the very early days of console 3D graphics. And look, there is nothing wrong with this at all. This is exactly what the PlayStation looked like. We all know that the PlayStation Classic is based on a well-developed open source emulator, so we can't complain about that. And I'm not seeing any strange artifacting or anything like that. So in that regard, it displays fine. It's just more of a case of my personal opinion. It just hasn't aged that well. In saying that, of all the consoles I've owned and mucked around with over the years, the one console I've really struggled to I guess upscale to look good on an LCD is actually the PlayStation. It just always, if you try and run it through an upscale, it always ends up with these weird jagged edges and so forth. This seems to go okay. I wish they'd given us a few more settings available to us, which I know were available in the emulator underneath, that just don't have, like, you know, the menu isn't there to play around with things like scan lines and different filters and so forth, just to get it the way you want. But all in all, look, it's functional. The gamepad feels great, and the graphics look perfectly fine.
So that's the Retro Flashback Classic Minis that are available as of the filming of this video. What do I think of them as a whole? Look, I think they're just simply good fun. Clearly some manufacturers like Nintendo have put in a bit more effort than others. The C64 I think really does struggle not having a keyboard. Yes, you can plug a USB keyboard in, but that kind of ruins the aesthetic of it to a degree, but they are working on a full-size one, I believe. The Mega Drive Flashback, I don't think it's as bad as what everyone says it is. I think it's perfectly usable and it's simply good fun. The PlayStation Classic, I only got it this morning, so it's a bit hard to say. My first impressions are that it should have come with a DualShock controller, and I do think the game selection is a bit poor. I'm not going to return it or anything, but I am going to hang on to it, and in the hope that someone a lot smarter than me eventually hacks it to add new games, and maybe even adds DualShock support somehow, or Sony release DualShock controllers for it. But all in all, I think they're really good. If you just want to buy them just to display, I think they look absolutely fantastic. To use, I think they're easy, and they're fun, and they're a nice big nostalgia hit, and that's why I'm quite happy to have them. Admittedly, I got all of them because I can be a bit of a completionist when I want to be, but all in all, I think they're pretty good. But Jason, can't you just build a Raspberry Pi and do all of this? Look, yes, everything here you can do on a Raspberry Pi. No arguments about it. Even I've done it. I built the Raspberry 64, and it's a Raspberry Pi in a 64 case. But there are some benefits to this that you just can't get with a Raspberry Pi. Firstly is that the average Joe in the street doesn't know how to program or even just to set up a Raspberry Pi. And by the time you buy the Raspberry Pi, the case, a power supply, a controller, an SD card, and all the rest of it, it's probably just the same price as the PlayStation Classic. But there's a lot of fiddling around. And the average person just wants to go down to JB or EB Games, buy this, plug it into their telly, and just simply have some fun.
The other thing is you don't get the look and the feel and the aesthetics of having a little Super Nintendo or a little PlayStation. Even if it spends most of its life just sitting on a shelf on display, you can't beat that. I think that's brilliant. So that's my wrap up of the Retro Classic Flashback Mini collection, as you might want to call it. I think they're good fun. Thank you for watching. I had a bit more fun than usual making this one. I kind of enjoyed it. So see you in the next video.